Hello, this is JR. Thanks for joining us today. The exploration is a courageous caution, is what I have titled it. A sequence from innocence through a pattern of social anxiety, all the way to a courageous caution. The title I gave is A Progression Through Innocence, the Chronic Distress of Social Anxiety. So that's a reference to a lasting or a recurring experience of stress or even distress, and then a courageous caution. So caution doesn't mean no stress ever. It means a different way of relating to the same concerns or the same issues or the same challenges. We could use a lot of different words, and we are going to be talking about words and language. As we learn language, we explore a variety of ways to use language, a variety of different ways to use language, and the following ideas could be expressed in a variety of languages. I am in Spanish would be
Yo soy or yo estoy.
yo soy
Or yo estoy.
or yo estoy.
Estoy.
Yo estoy. I'm not exactly a fluent Spanish speaker. Not exactly. Un poquitísimo.
Poquito.
Poquitísimo. Is that correct? That's a word.
It's acceptable.
It's acceptable. So the sequence of statements is like from the most elementary, getting more potentially more intricate, but this first sequence is relatively unexamined. This is just what everybody says without necessarily considering what they're saying or the fact that there is a progression and that there's this typical variation. Just like, when you start with a sprout of a plant, then you're going to have all these different variations, the different twigs and the different leaf patterns and the different sizes, and as the leaf gets bigger, as the flower starts to blossom, it goes through all these different phases, and once we've seen it a few times, it starts to look, it always looks pretty much the same, this progression that people go through from a state of innocence. We could call it naivety, there's a lot of words we could use, but innocence through even degrees or stages of chronic distress or social anxiety, also known as one of the words that we would associate that would be shyness. So shyness is a state of stress, maybe moderate stress, but it corresponds to a higher state of stress, which the person practicing shyness is minimizing or avoiding completely, possibly. But there's like a background of stress. So the shyness could be a form of caution. So there's nothing absolutely, discrete about these different categories. These are a flow, a progression. We'll see as we go through eventually an odd thing in regard to courage, something we might not have thought of before in regard to courage. So the patterns of really basic language. I am started with. I am life. I am my experience of life. I am only my own experience of life, but not all those other aspects of life. So I'll back up, actually, given what I just said. For an infant or a very, very young creature of any kind with no language whatsoever, there's the experience of presence. So there's the experience of presence. So there's experience, right? So I am all of my sensations, all of my interactions, everything I observe. When I observe something, well, is there a break between me and that thing? If I observe something in my life, is that me or is that not me? That's actually another level of linguistic distinction. So my life is only my own experience of life. I am only my own experience of life. I am my life. That's now fully objectified. So I am my life. So for people who are familiar with, language, that is an objectification. I am my life out there. And that's a valid way to talk about me, that I am my life out there. But in that case, I've now, in how many people talk, they exclude their own inner experience. So I am my life out there only, exclusively. And this is a very odd thing, really, but also very common. So my life eventually, let me say first, if I'm not experiencing my inner state, I'm only experiencing my life as out there, we could associate that with an elevated state, like excitement or fear. So stress. My life is just out there. Is this clear? So why am I, looking out all the time? Why would I not ever daydream or ponder or, stack blocks or whatever? I don't know. Why would I be focused way, way, way out beyond my immediate vicinity? We would typically say it's because of stress. Like how most people do it is out of stress. They don't just look out at very distant subjects out of spontaneous curiosity. Their attention is encouraged to be put outward by other people. So do you want me to say more about this, or okay? So I'll say very briefly, with regard to curriculum, we're taking some words and some ideas, and we're saying we as the curriculum makers are going to decide what all these different bureaucrats called teachers are going to present to people as what they should focus on. So they should focus on the weather. Okay, they were already going to focus on the weather, right? They should focus on ecology and plants and butterflies and little animals, and again, this isn't a very big stretch for a young person, but if you start focusing on elephants and you live in North America, or if you focus on kangaroos and you live in North America, that starts to be notably odd. Like, kids don't necessarily want to get a full range of zoology and know 500 different animals, but that's a common thing that they'll have accessible to them with TV or books or whatever, or encouragement of parents. Find all these different creatures, all these different climates, all these different parts of the world, 500 miles away, 5,000 miles away. So one of the things that kids might regularly be encouraged to explore is just different kinds of animals. But is it actually relevant to the child? Would they spontaneously learn 500 kinds of animals all over the world? Many children would not do that at the stage that they actually do, because it's done with outside encouragement. So this idea of outside encouragement isn't especially the idea of outside encouragement is very common. It's very natural. Where you will have it arise is, this is a more natural way for a child to have their attention spread into bigger horizons, is if they overhear the conversations of other children or adults. They'll ask questions about, or if they see something on TV, then they may get interested in some of those things. If it's a cartoon. If it's in Harry Potter, wow, then I want to know what is a bugglewort. Well, actually, a unicorn or a bugglewort, or I'm making it up. Okay, sorry, it's not a real Harry Potter fantasy creature. It's not a real fiction creature.
Unicorns are in Harry Potter.
Unicorns are in Harry Potter. Thank goodness, because
They're bogarts.
And what?
Bogarts.
Bogarts? That's what I said, isn't it?
No.
Okay.
Close. That was close enough.
All right, so you go to Universal Studios, to the Harry Potter theme park, thing, and you learn about Bogarts, right? Or there's the little elf in the one we just saw. The source was
Dobby?
which was the
House elf.
no, but what was which Harry Potter was that? Number 2,
2.
but what was the subtitle?
Chambers of Secrets.
Chambers of Secrets,
Chamber
right?
of Secrets.
Chamber of Secrets. So there was an elf, and it's a different looking elf than in Lord of the Rings or in all these different other elf stories. So that's a great example, though. Kids generally are familiar with elves. What kind of elves? Christmas elves with Santa, and all the kinds of elves that kids will get familiar with. And those are obviously presented them from other people. Children don't come up to you and ask you, hey, I want to know about elves, unless they've heard it from somebody. Somebody mentioned elf to them. They don't say, I saw this thing over there the other day. I want to know what that is. And you go, oh, that's an elf. They'll say that about cats or about maybe a hawk or something, but why are they going to be interested in elves? Well, it's from outside influence. So not all that distinctive at that point. We're actually not going to I don't plan to get into any of the controversial elements of curriculum, but curriculum is directing the focus of the student, of the target population, the students. It's directing their focus, it's directing their values. So these are the things that it's valuable to know about. Why? Because it's on the test next week, or whatever other explanations are given. So as I'm focusing out there, why am I interested in elves if I'm a little kid? One of the reasons is because other people are encouraging me to look at it. Other people are talking about it, or why I'm interested in any of these other, subject matter in school. Why is a kid interested in school? Why does a kid care about the events of school? Why do they care about the grades that they get if they have a test? Typically, there's a huge amount of social encouragement to say this is important. Their parents, the other students, the teachers, the whole environment is influencing them to value certain things, whatever's on the test, and to devalue or neglect everything else. So a major stage is I am my life. And then beyond that, my life, me, I am my experience of how other people relate to me. So the social dynamic is me. All I am is how other people relate to me. That's not true, but that's not specifically true, but that is a kind of story or a kind of interpretation that someone can have. Who I am is how other people tell me who I am, or how other people relate to me, or my experience of interacting with other people, how they relate to me, how I relate to them. So there's all these different variations. My life is fluctuating and mortal. I don't actually want to get into the detail of that, but my life is fluctuating and mortal. One of the core issues that I do want to really emphasize here is the idea of the social approval of one particular person. So who is the first person or organism that is important to any newborn, generally speaking? Parents, if you narrow it down to one.
Mother.
Or the mother, right? Any mammal, there's nursing. So, or most mammals, ideally, in a case of a healthy situation, in modern human civilizations, nursing may be very brief or not even happen at all. But the care of that caregiver, typically the mother, is how important to the life of the newborn.
Essential.
Almost exclusively the only important thing. It's like so so dominant as far as an issue. So my life depends on the care and approval of my mother. And that is a natural infantile dynamic. Infantile just meaning in the stage of infancy, that age period. So It goes on from there, though. My life depends on the approval of my mother, can then extend into, who does my mother value? If my mother values this teacher, and my mother values the school system, and my mother values the father, and my mother values the grandfather, and my mother values the mother's employer, and you have all this network of people, so then you have to start, well then typically a child will start to get interested in, I want not just my mother's approval, but I want to be aware of this whole range of, this whole network of social approval and social disapproval. So my life depends on approval. For an infant, my life depends on other people's approval. That's just a fact. Generally speaking, it's super conducive to survival to have mother's care and approval. If mother goes, I'm fine, but I don't want that one, I'll focus on the other ones, then that makes a big difference in the thriving of a particular child. So my life depends on the approval of my mother can then become, my life depends on the approval of my teacher, my friends, my employer, my spouse, my church, I said my employer, Santa Claus. My life depends on the approval of Santa Claus. Obviously some of these are more intense and some of them are more casual or fleeting. My life depends on the approval of St. Peter. What did I mean by that? You don't know? St. Peter, you get to heaven and St. Peter's there.
He opens the door.
He might open the door. It depends. What does it depend on? You know the idea?
How good you have been.
How good you've been. So the approval of St. Peter is what either gets you into heaven or hell or whatever. This idea of the Roman Catholic saint named Peter is borrowed or a variation of earlier ideas. I don't know if there was a specific Jewish version of that, but I do know that there were versions of that in other what we call Mediterranean mythologies, Mediterranean systems. So my life depends on the approval of St. Peter. Well, if my life depends on the approval of St. Peter, or if whether or not I deserve to be here, I'm looking for another word. Justified. My life is justified only if I have the approval of St. Peter. Otherwise, I'm fundamentally unjustified. Can you get this as a typical context that people will adopt or will explore? So the approval of St. Peter justifies my existence. So that's kind of weird, but common. So it's important to identify what attracts their approval. Whose approval? Whoever's, mother, St. Peter, whatever. Also, what attracts disapproval? That can certainly also be relevant. So this is all clear. And some of what, attracts approval and attracts disapproval will be told. Like somebody will just really clearly be told, or they'll be shown so simply that it's very easy for someone to identify. In contrast, there are occasions in which the approval of other people is not explicitly a cause-effect, really obvious formula. So generally, as people get older, as you get further into life, there'll be complex things where they'll say, well, if you want your PhD in such and such field, then you have to do X and Y and Z. But they don't tell you as long as you don't do A, B, and C. There's a set of explicit rules, and that in addition to those explicit rules, there are implicit or informal rules. So do you get that there can be both, and that when I say informal rules and formal rules or explicit rules, there's no cut and dry barrier between the two. There's actually this range of issues, some explicit, some less explicit, and everything in between. So approval becomes complex. It's not just, for the infant, does my mother smile at me? I don't know if y'all are anybody's aware of this, but neurologically, the mother's smile is one of the most potent triggers for a child's neurological health. They really associate the mother's smile with, thriving and health. So if you're a mother of a newborn, smiling at the child a lot is actually pretty typical and natural for most mothers. But also, can be done as an intentional practice, as well as being considerate of displaying anger in the midst of the child. Like certain kinds of intense emotion might be really disruptive to a newborn, especially if it's their mother who's displaying that anger. I remember, or whatever emotion. I remember seeing some of my nephews. These were my cousins. I remember seeing some of my cousins the first time they saw their father cry. I happened to be there the first time that these boys remembered ever seeing their father cry, and they were scared. They were definitely confused. They're like, he doesn't cry. Mom cries, but he never cries. And they were really, scared. Now, that was an unusual thing, and these were like 7 and 9, 10-year-old kids, so it wasn't like, that big of a deal. They didn't freak out. They were literally confused, disoriented, scared, but like in a moderate way. And their dad was injured and then recovered, and they had to go to bedside and interact with him. I don't remember if he was like medicated or anything, but it's like, it was a startling kind of confrontation with the idea of mortality, or the possibility of someone. It was a motorcycle collision, actually, was the incident. So the idea that somebody would be around and then suddenly not be around, that's not on the agenda of the average 7-year-old to ponder. When I first lost a pet, that was a pretty big deal. So for kids, sometimes, I remember seeing a movie where, the one of the main cartoon characters dies. It can be an intense experience for, some people. So it is a little more than just approval and disapproval. There's this whole network of, for a 7-year-old, or for instance, there's multiple people whose approval is relevant. There could be teachers, various parents, uncles, aunts, whatever, groups of people. But approval is always a important theme for a young person. And at some point in someone's life, approval might not be a particularly important issue, or the particular approval of one person. So instead of it being so focused on the mother, it could be spread out across several people, eventually spread out across dozens of people, to the point where someone's level of concern about any particular person's approval is really moderate or minimal relative to their earlier experience. So we want to identify whose approval is important. If pretty much we know that, but that actually becomes an issue. I don't think I mentioned it in my notes, but at some point it could be an issue. Well, whose approval should I focus on? Because my mom's real upset here, but I'm not upset by her being upset. I notice that it's okay with me. Maybe this is age 12 or age 25 or whatever it is, but at some point someone's approval, I realize, isn't that important to me functionally, potentially. So whose approval is important, if anyone's. And then what attracts their approval and what attracts disapproval. So it's a typical stage then that somebody will curiously and cautiously and just naturally get interested on how people should be in order to attract approval and avoid disapproval. How should people be? How should I be? And then it's typical to focus on how do I become that? if I'm not that now, any occasion of discrepancy, I want to cover that gap. I want to stop being how I should be according to that model and become what I should be according to that model. And then as time goes on, those models change. What a 7-year-old should be, what a 14-year-old should be, what an intern at the medical college should be, what a practicing physician should be. All of these things change. So we study how people should be and focus on becoming only that. This can be casual, but in many people's experience, it's not casual. It's actually an issue of stress. At some point, there's some crisis, there's some emergency. It could be a fire or whatever. You know, a hurricane's coming, okay, or a fire alarm at school or whatever, right? And there's the adults are in a mode of stress, and then the children are in the midst of that, and they need to know right now what's the right thing to do. And okay, I don't want to get yelled at, and it's an unfamiliar thing. So what I've been used to doing that Santa Claus liked, it's no longer relevant when there's a fire alarm going off. So there's just this whole world of being attentive to approval, disapproval, and it's important to be perceptive to what works, what promotes my own thriving, my own, from a financial perspective, what can I get paid a lot of money to do? If I rake the leaves in the front yard, I can get 50 cents in an hour. How is that compared to cleaning the oven? I can't clean the oven that often, but I can get $1 in 1 hour for cleaning the oven. So, whatever. So people start to be oriented towards priorities. Like, this is all a very normal process. So I study how people should be according to whatever system of approval and disapproval. Then I become only that, or I attempt to become only that, and that involves an aspect of stress. Depending on how big the gap is between me and how I should be, or how people should be, that either becomes an issue of somewhat, moderate evolution, or an issue of stress, or an issue of distress, or whatever range of intensity. So I must know exactly how I should be, and then experiment with different methods to become how I should be. So once I know how I should be, I gotta, what are my methods to produce the change? That's normal exploration for people to attempt. It may be disappointing, frustrating, unsuccessful, but a typical thing is, how do I become that? How do I get the approval? I know a common thing in my history, I would think, well, if I'm interested in that person's approval, I could say, if I want to get into that college, what do I need to do to get into that college? It's different from college to college to some extent. If I'm interested in if I want to go out on a date with somebody, I have to actually be considerate of, well, do they like horror movies? If I'm asking them out on a date, do they like horror movies? Do I like horror movies, even if they do? So there's all these different issues that actually come up. Okay, there's an attraction, but then what's my method for, approval or a consent agreement? When I say approval, of course, I mean a general range of human interaction. So I experiment with different methods to become how I should be or produce the result that I have in mind. I also can get really interested in hiding or eliminating what should not be about me or about other people, my family. That's an interesting thing where I don't want to tell other people certain details about my family. I emphasize certain things and I hide certain things, potentially. And it can also be based on who I'm talking to. When I'm talking to at a job interview, I emphasize certain things and I de-emphasize or distract from certain things, or I'm vague or whatever it is. So I eventually may notice something remarkable about all of the various people that I've been trying to study and to impress. So, again, I started with a mother figure, teachers, employers, etc. I may notice something remarkable about all of these various people that I've been trying to study and to impress. I want to change myself to or conform my behavior or my presentation to whatever I perceive is going to obtain their approval or maintain their approval if I already have it. So what is so remarkable about all these other people in regard to what I've set up so far? They're all doing the same kind of thing that I'm doing. They're all fixated on approval. They're all focused on approval to some extent. Obviously it varies, but if they're not pre-infantile, if they're not newborns, then they're going to be interested in the response they get from other people. Maybe certain other people, I think about in the social work field, there's certain individuals who have very limited social skills, and one of the issues that would be highlighted by someone making an assessment of someone's social skills would be, can they recognize that they need to vary their behaviors and their joke topics and so forth with different people. So what's funny with 5-year-olds is not necessarily funny with 9-year-olds or with 20-year-olds. It takes different kind of content. If I'm talking to people with very different linguistic capacities and fluencies, I've got to vary my presentation, or I will, be frustrated or incapable of producing results. So I don't have to be frustrated. I could just be disappointed, but I won't get the results that I have in mind across the board. I'm going to eventually realize that the feedback and the responses and the results I produce vary considerably. So other people are fixated in many cases on social approval. The teachers want the approval of the school board commissioners, the principals, maybe the parents, et cetera, et cetera. The judge, if it's an elected judge, they have the issue of the approval of the party, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or whatever. There's all of these networks of approval and disapproval. A mother in interacting with a newborn or an infant, the mother may not be operating from a fixation on approval in that particular, in her interaction with the newborn, but in other parts of her life as a child gets older, a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 11-year-old, those kids in a mother's household, they're going to have to start to be aware of what are topics that I want to avoid around mom. What are topics that are really good ones to bring up around mom? What do I want to present to her to please her? But what is, as far as mom's concern for social approval, if I'm at the library, if I'm at church with mom, if I'm just walking down the street in public, do different things produce different results in regard to my interaction with mom or what I do with mom? Of course. Why? Because she's interested in social approval. So this isn't something that's wrong, that somebody shouldn't be interested in approval, no one should ever be infantile. That's ridiculous. That's the kind of, I don't know that I'm going to get off into that subject at any depth, but the idea is that somebody had to create this idea that people shouldn't be interested in social approval. For somebody to be dismissive of the idea that social approval is important to me or anybody else. Of course it is. Right? How important is it? Oh, that varies. So all these other people whose social approval I'm interested in, they're also interested in attracting social approval and avoiding disapproval. So a common theme of how people should be is that they should be courageous. So this is now getting back to our some of our target matter when we started. How people should be is they should be courageous. More specifically, they should courageously do the things that they should do. And courageously be the way that they should be to attract social approval. So one of the first things we do with this idea of courage is confound it immediately with social approval. But consider that courage isn't just operating in accord with anticipated social approval. Yeah. So it's ironic that sheltering a fixation on social approval will never allow for courage. So there's kind of like this thing between if I want social approval, then I've got to do the things that correspond to social approval. I can't really be spontaneously, authentically courageous. I can do the things that other people will call courageous, but that's not the same as what I mean by courage. So the social approval in the world does not provide the direct experience of being courageous. So for me to experience being courageous, getting a bunch of people's approval that says, oh, you're really courageous, that doesn't work. I can have lots of people tell me I'm courageous, and I will not experience being courageous. Social approval is not how you get the experience of courage. That is just not how it works. So the story of the Wizard of Oz, a piece of paper or a little medal or badge does not give someone courage. The ink on paper or the writings on the badge, they can record social approval. Like, here I am the teacher, and I give you a certificate for perfect attendance, and we glorify you. Everybody stand up in front, and you're going to clap, and everybody should have perfect attendance like these 3 ideal students. And, we shuffle those students through. We don't, they're just being run through a system. There's not really that particular interest in them individually. They're just, they had great attendance. All of them that had great attendance to get on stage. So they didn't do anything really that significant to get the award, to get the recognition, the reinforcement, the validation. So the wizard goes up to the lion and says, here is my permission that you can be courageous in case you are anxiously waiting for it. So for the one who is in chronic distress, doesn't want to be too radical, doesn't want to be too experimental, doesn't want to fail, doesn't want to be exposed to criticism, rejection, all those kind of things. For them, it might be relevant for some authority figure to say, here's my permission for you to be courageous. So I give the medal to the lion and said, okay, here's my permission to be courageous. And what is the lion's experience? I don't want to be. What? Are you sure? Right? Can you get how that's freaking terrifying to someone at some point? That's the last thing they want is permission to be courageous, right? No. Just tell me how to be courageous. Well, what should I do? Right? Well, that's not courageous. I mean, we can identify things like in a military setting, you go out and you go into danger and kill the enemy, and you go into danger to recover your injured comrades and things like that. So those kinds of courage, certainly you can be told what to do in terms of what's courageous, but consider that there is a kind of courage that is beyond the realm of outside external direction. Okay, so that's fine if we think of all the kinds of courage that are socially approved, socially defined. That's all fine. And people can be proud of their bravery when they go out and do something bold and they get acknowledged by their community or by an authority figure. Those are all fine. And there's an independent kind of courage, or there's a kind of courage that's independent of all that. You're in the maybe mode, or in the of course mode.
Which one?
Huh? There's a kind of courage that's independent of external instruction about how to be courageous.
Okay.
Authors, actors, could be politicians, comedians. Good. That's actually the first thing I thought of, but I forgot as I started my thinking, how am I going to say it? So a comedian, whether it's a spontaneous, comic delivery or a scripted thing, there can be really bold things. In science, there can be really bold things that are not what, it's that are not what's been instructed, that are even contrary to what's been instructed. It can take a lot of courage to challenge an authority figure. Or even simply to question an authority figure, or not to religiously presume that an authority figure is accurate just because they're an authority figure. So to be skeptical at all takes an element of courage. For a student in a school setting where there's all this encouragement, and here's what's true, and here's what gets you credit on the test, and here's how it really is, and you learn it and you repeat it, and then to go back and say, wait, that might be inaccurate, that might be imprecise. There's a courage that corresponds to that. And there can be courageous acts of communication or courageous acts of withdrawal. I'm not going to get into that fight. I'm not going to support that proposition. I'm simply going to withdraw, even though there's tremendous social support that everybody who's a good person will do what St. Peter wants them to do and do what Santa Claus wants them to do. But you know what? I'm not doing that. And maybe someone justifies that with the idea of, well, it's not right for me to conform to an evil system or something. And those are still like types of courage. There's a lot of different types. We can acknowledge that as a type of courage to rebel, right? To be a skeptic can be courageous. To actually rebel, to challenge, all of those things can involve courage. I did title this a courageous caution, though. So the kind of thing where we're going to show contempt for authority and prove them wrong, that's not what I mean by courageous caution, just as a side note. So courage exists or extends beyond the realm of social approval. Courage is not an act of intentional rebellion against something that should not be how it is. Or courage isn't limited to just intentional rebellion against something that should not be how it is. Courage is experiencing fear and then acting anyway. That would be one typical definition. Even to act with great caution and great attentiveness. Why? Because there's this context of fear. There's an alertness or an alarm, and then action with alertness, even alarm. That's courage. Courage also involves allowing fear to be witnessed by others. So it's not trying to hide one's own experience of fear. Some kinds of courage are not trying to hide fear. The fixation on hiding one's own experience of fear from others is perhaps the most crippling form of social anxiety. It corresponds to, tremendous shyness. I'm trying to think of the other words for shyness. They're like medical, clinical terms, but reclusion, seclusion, somebody who, doesn't want anybody to see them afraid. I think my forehead is no longer red with hat marks, but I had a baseball style hat on earlier, and I had these red marks, and if I didn't want anybody to see the red marks, then I would have to I'd have to keep the hat on, or stay away from people, or stay out of, stay in the shadows, not away from the lights, So there's a variety of things that I'd have to manage in order to have people avoid seeing the red marks across my forehead. If I have the expression of fear on my face, eyebrows raised, any of the kinds of facial expressions or physical, postures that go with fear, if I have any of that if I have fear and I have any of those physical manifestations of fear, then it could be an interest of mine to hide that, or to distract people from that, or to withdraw from people so that they can't identify my fear. So the fixation on hiding one's own experience of fear from others can be a crippling form of social anxiety. I don't want, it's paranoia. I don't want anyone to know that I'm ever will be afraid or that I ever have been afraid. I dismiss the idea that I ever was afraid. I never did anything based on fear. I did it based on something else besides fear. Whatever, insert justification here. So what if the perceptions by others of any fear of mine is not a primary priority to me? What if I don't really care either way whether people notice that I'm afraid or not? What if I can be merely curious about accusations of fear? I don't have to dismiss them. I don't have to defend them. I don't have to attack people who accuse me of fear. And I could. I can be curious. I can be dismissive. I can be defensive. Any of those things. So I've got this full range available in a mode of courage. In other words, in a mode of relative ease or relief. In elevated distress, social anxiety, chronic anxiety, I would not be that flexible if someone accused me of being afraid. I would typically have you could say, a knee-jerk reaction of contesting their accusation of fear. Or I'm going to ridicule them, not actually going to address the issue of whether I'm afraid or not. I'm just going to explode into drama and tantrum of, well, how would they know? They're the one who's afraid or whatever. So I'm not really addressing in that scenario whether I'm afraid or not. So courage, how I mean it, courageous caution, is when I'm not fixated on being a particular way, as in being perceived by others as being a particular way. Okay? So if I'm fixated on getting Santa's approval, that can't be courageous. If I'm fixated on St. Peter's approval or Mother's approval or my employer's approval, that can't be courageous. So where we would look for acts of courage isn't necessarily in, a job setting. Like that's, jobs are not the proper place for us to develop a courageous caution. There's nothing wrong with the rigor of a job setting, but you just, that's not the setting. You do want to be attentive to the rules of your organization. What does your contract say with your client? All those kind of things. You want to, it makes sense to be aware of those things. And occasionally you might do something outside of those parameters. But generally, courage isn't part of formal institutional routines. So I didn't have this in my notes, but consider routines don't correspond to courage. So when I'm doing something out of routine, that's not courageous, and it won't be, and it never will be. It just has nothing to do with courage. It's fine. Routines can be very useful. They're just not the realm of courage. So it can be relevant on occasion to be attentive to how others perceive me. So I don't have to be dismissive of other people's approval or disapproval. I just don't have to be fixated on it. Any chronic distress that I may have experienced in the past, what I can relate to as just an enduring period of temporary social anxiety. Is that clear? So there was a temporary period of social anxiety, a period of chronic distress. It comes, it goes. Yeah, it's happened to me at various levels. High, moderate, low, whatever levels of stress or distress or panic. Those things have happened. Probably will in the future some, right? So I was simply terrified about certain things. I was paranoid about certain things. I was ashamed about certain things. That's normal. I've been alive all along. Back to I am life and I am all those. What am I? I've been alive all along, including during episodes of chronic distress or panic. When have I not been alive? That's kind of a weird question. So I was alive when suppressed when sleeping. I mean, suppress, like if I suppress my emotions or if other people suppress my emotions, whatever. So I've been alive all along during periods of chronic distress, during shame, during panic, during terror. When I condemned others in a panic, I was alive. Typically, if I'm condemning other people, it's in a panic. There's a background of panic before I would condemn someone. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Typically, if I resent someone, it's in a panic. And if I resented someone in a panic, I was alive. So this life thing sets up this like kind of like a neutralizing constant. So whatever I was panicking. The different forms of panic I had condemnation, contempt, resentment, justification. When I justified myself, you don't necessarily call it a panic, but there's a level of distress. If I'm defending myself and justifying myself, and yeah, I did that, but I had good intentions. Yeah, I did that, but it wasn't my fault. Those are justifications. So justifications involve some kind of a concern for disapproval, right? So we don't have to call it a panic, but when I resented others, I was alive. When I was justifying, I was alive. Constantly, I was alive. I had all these different behaviors, all these different, elevations of stress or distress, low, moderate, high, etc. That's what happened. When I argued, typically arguing is a form of panic. I don't mean just a discussion or a conversation, but like an intense, adversarial, antagonistic or adversarial arguing, that would be a form of panic. And when I argued in a panic, I was alive. When I justified my behaviors in a panic, I was alive. When I fantasized about a future utopia in which everything would be perfect and how it should already be, I was alive and panicking. So fantasizing about a future utopia is a form of panicking. It's a behavior that corresponds to distress, or at least elevated stress. Fear, concern. I don't think concern would be right. If I'm speculating about, this would be so much better, it's not just hopeful. It's an actual, it's a disassociation pattern. Are you clear how I mean this? So I'm taking my attention away from what actually is present and saying, well, if only in 1794 that had gone differently, then imagine how this would have gone, and we would be in a utopia now, and da da da. And I get into that, and it's an adaptive mental health, method. It's like it is it's a coping mechanism, and coping with what? Stress, panic, something like that. So we'll invent this utopia. We'll invent this future, fantasy. My panic was to temporarily shield myself from the intensity of certain experiences. I said things like, this is how people should be, over here, and certainly not like that. My panic was a shield from the intensity of certain experiences. I said, this is how people should be, not that. In utopia, this is how it's going to be. If only, the Republicans weren't so Republican. Then we would have a utopian, and we would have a utopian society, and how things should be would be how it would be, and how things shouldn't be wouldn't be how it would be, if only for those people. You know who I'm talking about, right? The bad people. The devil, the evil people. So, in the past, I lacked the maturity and courage to face certain experiences that might have been too disturbing or disruptive or embarrassing. Okay? All along, I have been alive. However much maturity or courage at any given time, however much concern for social approval, how much terror, panic, shame, all those different things, been alive all along. I am life. I never wasn't life. I am life. Now I accept the logical possibility that perhaps life should be how it is. Which includes the entire realm of panic. Panic should be how it is. And language should be how it is. Why? Because it is. So it should be how it is. Why? Because that's how it is. In panic, language can be used to identify what should be and what should not be. Whoa, wait a minute. Are you saying that when someone identifies what should be and what should not be, that can be a manifestation of panic? I am saying that. So that isn't the only occasion in which someone can identify what should be over here and what should not be over there. It doesn't have to be a panic, but in many cases it is. There is fear. There is stress relating to social approval. Here's how things should be in utopia, and here's how things should not be, and how do we cross the bridge and fill the gap and get from how it shouldn't be to how it should be? Well, first you do this, and then you do that, and then you change this, and then you know, all those strategies. For instance, if I worship the ideal that people should never panic, then I would never interpret my own patterns of past behavior as panic. Because people shouldn't panic. People should never panic. I wouldn't do that. No, because it's not how people should be. Like me, I would never do that in the past. No, ridiculous. In particular, I was only arguing. Remember the one time I was arguing? The reason I was arguing, it wasn't because I was in a panic. It wasn't because I was afraid of learning or afraid that some of my presumptions might have been slightly imprecise. The only reason I was arguing is because I was right. I was not panicking or afraid or in distress. I was just arguing because I was right. And as a manifestation of my superior intellect and stuff, right? And my cleverness and my loyalty to how it should be that I was taught in public school and learned from that one TV show and from the TV series. Actually, it was the whole set of shows, and you learn what it was called, What Jesus Thinks Should Be. And I watched the whole thing. It was like 2 seasons, and I got to know what Jesus thinks should be. And after that, then when anybody said something that wasn't what Jesus thinks should be, from what I learned on the show on TV, I was just doing them the favor of informing them that they were wrong. Right? Wrong? Right? So, I have noticed many other people who are arguing out of desperate panic, unlike me, to preserve the idea that they are right, which is, I don't know, it's just like delusional. I don't know what these people are, what's going on with them. They shouldn't be like that. They're panicking, which they shouldn't be. So they were fixated on social approval, which they shouldn't be. And they should not be so different from how I say they should be, because I'm repeating what I saw in that one TV series that I saw in public school called University of, what was the university? It was a public school that I went to. So you know who I'm talking about now, right? They're ruining my life. My life is totally heavenly except for my victimizers, right? Who are not being how they should be. And thus are making my perfect life into hell. So you can see that if I experience resentment or contempt or blame towards these people, it's only because I am right, I'm sincere, I'm not in a panic, I'm just more intelligent than they are, clearly. They're pretty arrogant too, I've noticed how those other people can be. So further, there's absolutely nothing that I can do about it because I worship an almighty God who is constantly paranoid about the potential interference and disapproval of the devil. God, of course, would help me since I'm being how I should be, except that those other people are interfering by being how they should not be. For example, one of those evil people once made fun of my logic by asking me why in regard to one of my sacred presumptions about how things should be. It's like this little 2-year-old kid. They come up, they say, why? Naturally, I gave them a very excellent answer, to which they, out of their intellectual inferiority, only responded with the same word again. Why? And so I answered because, not because I felt like I needed to. I wasn't anxious at all. I just, for their own good, I told them why, and then spanked them to drive the point home. And I offered further explanation, getting a bit frustrated by now at how annoying they should not have been. And once again, the child asked me, this time while crying, why? And what is it with toddlers these days? You know, I think that there is a problem that shouldn't be how it is, and what we need to do is go from how things shouldn't be to how they should be. And we need the method for going from how things shouldn't be to how things should be, right? Because you can't have, you don't want the victimizers ruining our life. So this is very important. And a courageous caution is caution while being alive. So see the difference? So caution. Caution when people might say you shouldn't be cautious. Oh no, you don't need to be cautious. It's fine. Risk everything, or risk that, or presume that, or whatever. Don't be cautious. Oh, yeah, there's no need to be cautious. That's silly. Being conservative is ridiculous. Why should you, question your own presumptions? Why should you examine your own thoughts? Why should you consider your own results and your patterns of behavior? Don't need attention and alertness. You're alive. Why should you need caution, attention, alertness, attentiveness, mindfulness, or caution? Courage is caution. I don't mean panic. I don't mean paranoia. I mean caution. Isn't that kind of weird? During this entire presentation, for speculative purposes, was I alive or not? I'll let you consider that while I answer the question for you. I was alive.